Good evening, everybody. We're going to make a start. I know that people are struggling to get here with the Piccadilly line. No doubt one or two have been persuaded by the last of the summer wine, because it is a lovely day. But thank you all for coming. I'm really looking forward to tonight, actually. So as most of you know, I'm Anne Francke. I'm the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and we are all about taking people on that journey from being an accidental manager to being a conscious leader. And there are many reasons why I like Adam. I think that, for one, he is absolutely a very conscious leader. He is somebody who, like me, has 1 foot here, 1 foot in the US. We both have both passports. His British accent is far better than mine, but we both studied in the States and also have a very strong affiliation here in the UK, having spent most of our careers here. Now, the other reason that I'm very fond of Adam, apart from the fact that we share this sort of glass half full outlook on things, is that he's a very feminist father. As you know, we champion a lot of gender initiatives at CMI because they boost productivity and they make for better line management. And I know that Adam has a young daughter, and in his own words, he fits his job around his young daughter, rather than fitting his young daughter around his job. And his job is an incredibly busy one. As you know, he's the Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce. And in fact, I also know, and many of you will remember, that he kind of owes his job to the whole Brexit thing, doesn't he? You know, he's been with the BCC since 2009 as head of policy. And prior to that was one of the founders of the
Centre for Cities.
Centre for Cities, which was ahead of its time because it championed devolution. And I think that that's a policy that is still, it's coming into force, and it should, I think, come more into force today. But when the previous DG, when Brexit all started and the referendum results, or in the run-up to the referendum, I think, the previous DG actually at the conference took the opportunity to declare his colors and say that he was pro-leave, right? Which created a lot of consternation, and anyway, he had to resign. And Adam duly stepped up, and I think he's done an absolutely phenomenal job. He's become one of the leading voices on Brexit, one of the absolutely leading authorities on the topic, and I'm really pleased to welcome him here tonight to share with us his views. And I know that they will be different from my views and maybe your views, but that doesn't matter. And one of the reasons I know this is when we were coming up for the title of this event, we said the ABCs of Brexit, and I thought, well, Adam, British Chamber. But now if you ask me what ABCs of Brexit stands for, I would say appallingly bad condition of the negotiations. And I know Adam does not agree with that because he told me so. But let's find out what he thinks. So Adam, welcome.
And thank
you.
you. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you this evening. I didn't deserve half of the accolades and nice things that Anne said about me in the introduction, but it is a pleasure to be here with a group of people who are committed to management, leadership, and showing people how it should be done, who are our colleagues and friends at CMI. So I'm very, very pleased to be here this evening. We're almost 6 months exactly away from the UK's exit date from the European Union. And Anne asked me by way of introduction to offer a few observations before we begin a wider discussion. These observations mostly are not my own. What they are is the synthesis of what I hear from 53 chamber business communities all across the United Kingdom. Just to give you a sense of scale, those 53 business communities, literally from Cornwall to Inverness, from Northern Ireland to Norfolk, have about 75,000 companies in their membership, and those companies in turn employ nearly 6 million people across the UK. So it's a tremendous swathe of the UK private sector, businesses who come together in their communities, both to do more business and be more successful, but also to make sure that the places where they do business are successful. So places, people, and profit all go together in the chamber network, much as they do with much of the philosophy and work that happens here at CMI. I want to make 3 high-level points to begin the discussion this evening, if I can, and expand on them a little bit. And then, of course, we'll open up to Anne's inquisitorial style and to wider discussion. The first of those is around business preparation for the change that's about to come and the impacts that they're about to see. Now, I divide the businesses that we see across the UK into 3 different tribes when it comes to Brexit. You've got the proactive, you've got the watchers and waiters, and you've got the ostriches. And all 3 groups are very, very important to understanding our level of Brexit preparedness in this country. Now, the proactive literally are about 1/3 of our businesses in chamber membership, so the minority. These are generally larger and internationally active firms, or those who can foresee direct impact from change in their trading conditions on day one, and they are all taking steps to ensure that their businesses can continue and that they don't have problems with their P&L or their balance sheets going forward. Now, one thing I constantly have to remind our dear friends in the political arena is that those businesses taking those steps and being prepared means that those businesses will be able to weather the storm. It does not mean, of course, that those businesses are necessarily taking decisions that are to the advantage of the UK economy as a whole. So preparedness is not the same thing as sort of bolstering the UK economy, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes if I can. Then there's the watchers and waiters. These are businesses who are entirely rational in their approach to life in the universe. They are busy, they are fulfilling orders, they are dealing with customers and suppliers on a daily basis, and if they deter their attention from those very basic business tasks to look at Brexit and what could be, their business could fall over, or an order go unfulfilled, or a customer leave them. So what they say is they're working flat out, they know that change is coming, and they will respond to it when they have something concrete and practical to respond to. Now, some people say that's not a sensible approach, they should be taking action now. Well, if you go around the country to some of these firms and you see these 50, 100, 250 person type businesses, and indeed many smaller firms as well, they have world-leading products and services. Their customers are happy with what they're getting. They have got to keep going on the day job. And if they detract their attention from that, they're going to face some very serious difficulties. So the watchers and waiters are not somehow stupid. They're actually just trying to keep business going, and then when they have something to respond to, they will. Then there are those who I sort of unkindly call the ostriches. It's not really good, probably, for me to call some of my own membership ostriches, but there are 2 kinds of ostriches. They're those who stick their heads in the sand because after 3 years of unremitting Brexit talk, they are simply sick and tired of hearing about it. And they do that because, again, in some cases they think, I need to just get on with my business, or sometimes they think, it doesn't affect me directly, so I'll not worry about it for now. Then there are those who have simply decided that under no circumstances does it have an impact on them. And sometimes you have to sit down with a business like this and talk to them and say, look, okay, it may not be immediately in front of you, but do you remember the film about 6 Degrees of Separation, the Kevin Bacon game from all those years ago where you could get from one person to another with just 6 connections? Well, I guarantee that almost any business in this country can get to a connection to Brexit and change in less than those 6 connections as well. So if you walk into a hairdresser's and they say to you, for example, oh no, this doesn't affect me at all, my clients are all local, it's fine. And I just say to them, hang on a second, the person who's running that chair for you is Lithuanian, and the shampoo is imported from France. You may be buying it from a UK distributor, you may be employing this person locally here in Doncaster, but at some stage of the game, there is an impact for you as well. So what we're encouraging those businesses to do is to try to set a little time aside and try to tackle some of the practical questions that they may face, some hypotheticals. And we've produced a business Brexit checklist, for example, that allows them to do that on things like workforce, contracts, cross-border trade. And they're questions that don't lead to an outcome in terms of Brexit. They are questions simply about business health. And firms that have used that have come back to us and said, you know what, we only took 2 hours on a Friday afternoon to do this, but it's incredibly helpful for us to ensure that when it does come time to step up our planning, we're ready to go. So we're trying to get the Ostriches moving in that way. The other thing I'd say in terms of impacts to date is that they are deeper than they are wide. In a small number of sectors and in a small number of areas, businesses are reporting that significant changes have happened already. But most businesses still tell us change is still to come. We're only at the leading edge of any impact of Brexit on recruitment, on investment and trade. So for those who say in the newspapers, oh look, we're already in this process, nothing's happened, everything's fine, what we see very clearly from our research is that the impact is coming. It is not here yet, so it's not a good thing to claim. And equally for those on the other side of the political debate who say, absolutely everyone has been impacted already. No, actually that's not true either. The impacts have been fairly specific and fairly localized, but again may expand in future. So we don't like the extremes on either side. What we like to do is to focus on the fundamental and practical issues facing our businesses. Now, given that underpreparedness overall, 2/3 of firms not ready, I think the consequences of a no-deal scenario or a messy and disorderly exit would be extremely significant. So we are very keen on avoiding that at all costs and engaging very strongly with the UK government to try to avoid that. Getting a transition period is important, and I think that all of us, both in this room and those of us in other business organizations, have got a shared responsibility together with government to help firms prepare for change when in fact it does come. So that was a very long-winded first point. Ladies and gentlemen, let me go more quickly, if I can, through the other two. My second is very much related to what I've just been talking about, which is that the priority for businesses is answers to practical questions. All of the discussion that we seem to have about Brexit in the newspapers, in the political arena and elsewhere is going along at 30,000 feet, an airplane flying over at 30,000 feet. Businesses need a conversation at helicopter level, really close to ground. And that's not always happening. So it's certainty and precision that they're after. And if you look, for example, at the government's no-deal notices, many of them don't deliver any certainty or any precision. A few of them do deliver things that businesses can take to the bank. But so far, businesses don't have that granular detail that they need in order to plan effectively. I'll give you one example that does actually work well, which was on VAT. And the government said very clearly that in the event of no deal or in the event that there's no VAT agreement with the European Union, anyone who's importing goods into the United Kingdom will have a postponed accounting system for import VAT. And that's not just from the EU, actually they said from around the world. Now this sounds technical and in the weeds, but if businesses had to pay VAT on purchases at the border whenever they imported something into the United Kingdom, you would have had a cash flow bomb literally exploding under thousands and thousands of businesses and complex supply chains. These are the kind of detailed things that actually matter to firms. And in areas like that where they've got that clarity, they can hopefully take that to the bank and then say, okay, I know that that's going to be all right. I'm going to be able to smooth my cash flow. What are the other issues I need to deal with? We've got 24 questions on what we call our Brexit risk register. All of us who do project management have red, amber, green risk registers in our businesses and everything else. Of the 24, 19 of those questions are red, 4 are amber, and 1 is green. So that gives you a state of preparedness at the moment. So the priority absolutely for us is answers to those practical questions. My final main point this evening goes back to what I was saying earlier about the economy as a whole and the fact that actually it is not just the process of Brexit negotiations that we need to be focusing on. And my point here is just simply this. We need a much bigger effort and much more attention on fixing the fundamentals for growth here in the UK. We could get the best possible Brexit deal anyone ever imagined, but if we've got £8 billion worth of potholes on the roads, poor mobile phone coverage, bad broadband, airport expansion that takes 20 years to finish up, an apprenticeship levy that isn't working as it should, a training system where businesses are having a really hard time getting clarity on what it is that they need to do, et cetera, and so forth, we're not going to be successful. Great Brexit deal, okay, fantastic, but we don't have the growth conditions we need here at home. Now that is our absolute focus at the British Chambers of Commerce. We spend a lot of time going in and saying to government, you need to devote as much, if not more, bandwidth to the world beyond Brexit Day and what you're going to do to enable businesses to be successful in future. I want to see massive incentives for business investment over the next couple of years. You want domestic firms who've paused investment and international firms who are wobbling about the UK to pile in. So those big investment incentives need to come forward. We need to have the right debate about business taxes and costs. So, I heard the Prime Minister say some very positive things about business in New York yesterday. I'd rather she was saying them in Birmingham than in New York, quite frankly. But when she said those things, I thought to myself, okay, the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G20. Well, the government was already going in that direction anyway. I want to know about business rates. I want to know about employers' national insurance. I want to know about the immigration skills charge, the national living wage, pensions auto-enrollment, the cost of government energy policies. The things that matter to most of our firms are actually the costs that have been piled on them before they make any money, not when they've made some profits and have to give a share back to the exchequer. So there's a real focus on those upfront costs for business. So business preparation is variable. Practical questions are where we need the answers, and we've got to fix the fundamentals at home. If there are 3 messages that I hope I can get across this evening, it would be those. But I just want to end on an optimistic point, because some of you may be ready to slit your wrists by now after all of that. The businesses that I see in towns and cities across the UK, week in and week out, are incredibly resilient. They're incredibly resourceful. And they have a quiet determination and confidence that whatever happens through this process, they intend to make a success of the world to come. I think that it's time now to see that nurtured really extensively, through that fixing of the fundamentals I was talking about and through getting a comprehensive deal. Because these businesses have been through so much political upheaval. A Scottish referendum in 2014, a general election in 2015, a Brexit referendum in 2016, a general election in 2017, Brexit negotiations in 2018. They've weathered all of that. They've kept growing, even at a modest rate. But now it's time to actually help them get past that and really fly. So hopefully we'll come up with some ideas tonight on how to do that, and I look forward to engaging with everyone on it in future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. That's great. So let me comment and ask a question relating to each of your 3 points. Firstly, the segmentation. Yeah. 1/3 prepared, 2/3 unprepared. Well, we know that in the managerial community, 4 in 5 are unprepared. Yeah. They just don't know which way to turn. They feel very uncertain. So what can they do to increase their sense of control over those things that they can control, and to increase their concern about, for example, the fate of their colleagues?
Sure.
What advice would you give to them?
I think that managers, particularly at a middle level in businesses, actually have more power and more agency than they think in a process where they, like the rest of us, don't know what the outcome is going to be. I think the first thing that people can do is the most obvious one for many of us who've engaged with the CMI, but not necessarily so obvious out there, is supporting the people in their own business. And there's no better way to do that right now than, literally person by person, work with every European employee in your business to ensure that they feel safe and secure. Because if you want to retain that talent, the best thing that you can do is work with it and reassure it that actually, whatever the circumstances, they are going to be allowed to stay in this country and stay in their jobs. Now, it took the Prime Minister far, far too long to make that unequivocal commitment, which she did last Friday. It should have come the day after the referendum, quite frankly. And we've been calling for it since the day after the referendum. But it's finally there. And the Home Office settled status scheme is there as well. So I think, first of all, businesses should be paying, and many are, for their employees to go through that scheme once the pilots are done. It's 65 quid. The government, Whitehall is amazing. It says, it costs a British citizen £65 to get a passport, so it should cost a European £65 to register. No, it should be free. And the best businesses and the good businesses are actually just taking that cost on the chin and doing what they need to do. And it's for managers to help individuals through that process, particularly for those for whom English is not their first and sometimes not their second language. I think the second thing that managers can do is look at points of disruption in supply chains, points of vulnerability in the supply chain, or that bit of the supply chain or the value chain where they have agency and where they have ownership and responsibility. And if they're able to identify those and simply know where they are, that when the time comes to react, they'll be better prepared than if they were flat-footed. The thing that I fear most is flat-footed businesses and flat-footed managers going into a process of change. And it doesn't take tons of time in order to identify these things, but if you identify those vulnerabilities, and indeed, on the other side, those opportunities that may arise from some of this change, you're better placed to then deal with it when it comes. And I think the third thing that people should be doing is making the argument with senior management about upskilling existing teams. The tone of things at the moment is that we are going to see constraints in future on the workforce that comes from other countries, particularly at the low and medium skilled end. So both bringing in young people and upskilling existing teams is going to be absolutely critical. We all know how hard it is. We all know that businesses have tried their best usually to recruit locally before they go to international talent. But I think that upskilling is going to become particularly important. So when managers are able to identify training needs amongst their staff and can make a great business case to senior leadership, I think, and that gives us a good foundation to go forward on.
So I agree with all of that, obviously, and I'm going to now go to the third one and then circle back to your second point. So we couldn't agree more that government needs to think, the politicians and businesses need to think beyond Brexit.
Yeah.
And concentrate things that are within your gift. And you mentioned a whole raft of government things, and you mentioned some business things too that they can do. But the upskilling point, the investment in management and leadership, that's something that was, even conspicuously, the word skills conspicuously absent from the whole Labour Party conference, for example. We know that British businesses underinvest in skilling their people. And we're paying the productivity price for it. So do you not think that skills and upskilling and reskilling needs to become a much more salient point, not just of policy, but of business behavior?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, look, is business culture in the UK generally good? Yes. Am I lucky in my role at representing what I would call civic businesses, those who take that commitment quite seriously? Because basically businesses don't tend to join membership organizations when they're not good corporate citizens because they get found out by their peers. So I see the good bit, but every single one of those businesses can identify others in their local area who aren't doing as much. We do need to be talking about this a lot more. We do need to change the culture around it. I'd love to see massive incentives as well for businesses to make those investments in upskilling and training. And the thing that, there are many things that bother me, but one that I come back to over and over again is, why can't businesses capitalize the cost of training in the annual investment allowance? There's very limited circumstances whereby they can do that. I'd love to see something like that come forward. Okay, so if you're a manufacturing business and you've got some plant and machinery you're buying, yes, you can definitely capitalize that. But training, only under very limited circumstances where HMRC can be sure that the value of that training is fully captured by the single business.
Yeah,
I think that's mean and unnecessary, and I think that actually if government wants to see a big upskilling, find ways to incentivize businesses to do that training more. Because I think the culture change is one that, yes, we in business have to lead, but incentives can help get us there.
So a lot of people would argue, and CMI has been supportive of the principle, and I know you are as well. A lot of people would argue, well, that is exactly the market failure and the classic underinvestment that, for example, the Apprenticeship Levy was supposed to address, right? And the prize is big, by the way. I mean, the Bank of England and others say that the biggest cause of the productivity gap is poor management and leadership, and that driving that up 0.1% would lead to a 10% increase in productivity, or 150 billion to the UK GDP, which is kind of twice the estimates that people say Brexit might cost. So it's a big prize. The levy was supposed to address that, right? But so why is only 10% of it spent, and what do we need to do to unlock that investment?
I think the Apprenticeship Levy is an example of a good idea that was allowed to be transmogrified by Whitehall into something very complicated. It's not the first time that's happened, and it won't be the last, I have a feeling. But I think it did get too complicated and too messy for businesses. I think businesses should have been able, from day one, to pass some of their levy payments along to their supply chain companies, particularly larger firms, and actually have a much closer relationship with their supply and value chains in terms of training up their people, because then that productivity boost just literally bumps, boom, 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 straight up the ladder. We think the bureaucracy around it is too complicated for a lot of people, even though the digital accounts process is a good thing. The differences between the four nations of the UK. In Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, unfortunately, what businesses are seeing is that the devolved governments have literally trousered the levy and said, oh, we'll just use that to pay for what we were doing already on apprenticeships, rather than allowing businesses the flexibility to take more decisions. And there's a real outcry there, because they basically said, oh, we can cut spending in one area and just use the business money to replace it, rather than let businesses design with us what the future is going to look like. So there are a lot of things that I think went wrong with the levy. I still think it is salvageable. I still think it's a good idea, but it needs to be fixed on the feedback from businesses if it's going to work. I've already heard people talking about, oh, we've got massive issues with the government's commitments to the NHS and this, that, and the other thing. Why don't we just whack the levy up? Well, too many businesses already see it as a significant payroll tax. If you whack it up before you actually get it working properly, you will undermine confidence entirely. And then we'll be back to square one, which is I don't think where any of us want to be.
No, and in fact, in some cases, they're actually whacking the cost down even before it's, even with the most popular apprenticeships, they're saying they're cutting the funding spends, which obviously has employers and delivery partners and the apprentices themselves up in arms. So I agree with you. It's a good policy that has not been well executed, and we are, as you know, working together to try to fix that.
Indeed.
Now let's go to the middle point. So you're saying, and I completely agree with this. So here's government up here, 30,000 feet, and they really need to be not actually. It's a combination of helicopter level and drone level, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
no, in the grass.
They really, or even walking, right, and on the street level, right, really down to earth. In your view, have the political party in power or any of the parties done a good job in their approach to how they've approached Brexit? What if you could start again, right? What would you do differently?
I think that, there are many things I would do differently, goodness. I think that a lot of times politicians start at the wrong end of the telescope. They think about the parliamentary arithmetic of things and the process before they think about the outcomes they're trying to achieve, and before they think about how to bring people along with them on that journey. And they haven't done it with Brexit. I've spent 3 days in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference and spoken at innumerable fringe events about Brexit. And inevitably the politician who comes along to have that conversation starts talking about parliamentary maths, electoral tactics, and a variety of other things. The same will happen at the Conservatives next week. This is not a party political point in any way, shape, or form. And I just sat there and listened for a while. And then I said, why aren't you focusing on the question of who can I hire in my business the day after March the 29th, and how long can they stay? Will I have to file customs declarations when I export my goods? You name it. There are a million different points like this. Oh yes, will I be able to travel to see clients because will the airplanes be flying? Will I have to pay mobile phone roaming charges when I'm on business trips? Some of the questions are actually quite simple and quite retail.
How much longer will it take my parts to get in the country?
Absolutely, but no one, literally no one in the political arena wants to talk at that level. They want to talk up here. And I've never seen a higher level of frustration amongst business people with all parties across the spectrum for the nature of the conversation they're having around it. And you could interpret that as that we in business organizations have failed. You could say we have failed to force them into those grassroots issues and those practical and ground level issues. It's certainly not for lack of trying. My forehead is flat from banging it against the wall of various government departments. I promise you that. But I think there is a real gap opening up between business and politics at the moment. And one of the things that we have to do, particularly once hopefully a deal or an outcome is reached, is to repair that. Because I think that if politicians think it's okay to say, oh, don't worry, we know what's best for you, and actually what we need to worry about is the process, and everything we fight for in business, which is about outcomes, and everything that people ultimately want, which is about prosperity, well-being, health, social cohesion, etc., will suffer too.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And what was that word you used to describe politicians earlier?
Oh dear, which one was it? I've forgotten. This was before we started. Go on.
Well, it was a P word, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and actually, to be fair, what he said was, well, a lot of politicians are psychopaths. Now, to be fair to Adam, A lot of CEOs are too, right? Sociopaths, psychopaths, they're attracted to power. And I think that is, maybe some of the mass around this and some of the machinations around this and some of the 30,000 feet around this is a result of feeling disconnected from that very outcome focus. And certainly when I look at the Brexit process, if we were setting back to rewind, first of all, it was not a party political thing. I don't think it ever should have been. It was a referendum taken by the population. Everybody across parties, I think, should have been involved in crafting a solution with input from business, with input from working groups and the NHS and those affected. Like we approached the Olympics, for example, which were 10 years in the planning. What do you think of that? Do you agree, disagree?
Look, I certainly agree that we are capable in this country, and we do ourselves down a lot, but we are capable in this country of doing big projects and executing them well. We love to flagellate ourselves about how bad we seem to be at it, but I've spoken with a number of people who planned the Olympics or some of the other major infrastructure projects like Crossrail, which are being executed successfully over time. And actually they point at things like the new airport in Berlin, which is now 10 years overdue, and a variety of other things. Other countries don't necessarily get these big projects right either. Where we've failed on this one is because there is not something concrete at the end of it, like an infrastructure project, rather this is a process, we did fail to come together early on. I think it was a mistake, and I've said it previously, for the UK to go into negotiations with the European Union without a very clear and settled view on what we wanted to get out the other side. Now, why did I say that? Because no business would enter into a negotiation without knowing what it wanted out of it at the end either. Yep. Because actually, it would not be a successful negotiation. No. So, we should have been very clear about what we wanted. But, of course, hindsight is 2020. It's very easy for me to sit here this evening and say that. And I am, as a business person, not subject to the same pressures that politicians will have been. So I do think that we could have done things very differently, but I think we still have a chance to do them differently. And where we have a chance to do them differently isn't in the negotiations, but it's about the kind of country we build for after March the 29th of next year, and whether we're actually willing to commit the resources, both in terms of sweat equity and in terms of capital, in order to make that economic growth and transformation happen.
Well, and waking up the politicians to the reality of creating a practically successful country, right? Yeah. Which is, as you've said, and that was your middle point and your final point, we've really been ignoring that.
And it's people yeah. as well. Look, we do the biggest private business surveys in the UK. And we have done for a very long time. And every quarter we get a set of results which we brief into the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England before they take interest rate decisions, and to politicians across government and across the opposition. And one of the things that we've been seeing is that huge numbers of businesses in recent years have tried to recruit. And because of the difficulties that they've had, some of them are starting to give up.
We see
because
that too.
They're trying so hard to get people. They have so much difficulty, whether it's at a low, medium, or a high skill level, that they just give up. And we know that people are at the heart of absolutely every business. And CMI certainly knows that people are at the heart of absolutely every business. And I think that we need to see a people-centered strategy coming out from all of the politicians, whatever their political colors, alongside the enabling infrastructure that lets people be successful as well. I'm talking here like digital connectivity, housing, transport, etc.
Absolutely.
But we do need to see more of that focus on people. And for me, that is immigration and training in the UK. It's both. They're both part of a single sort of labour ecosystem.
Yeah, and those incentives that you were talking about, and an apprenticeship levy that works. And finally, before I open it up, Canada Plus, checkers, hard Brexit, probably not. Second referendum, people's vote with staying in the EU, second referendum, people's vote with no option to stay in the EU. Do you have a preference, and do you have a prediction?
I call this the sort of checkers, chess, Cluedo, Monopoly question. There are lots of different board games out there, and I really don't express a preference, or do I express a prediction. The reason is because fundamentally I'm here as a business representative rather than as an individual. I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. And I go back always to those 24 questions, and it's the outcome that matters. If businesses get the answers they need to those 24 questions about practical operations, they could call the deal Super Lamb Banana or whatever else they wanted to. It wouldn't actually matter, right? Because it's not the form that matters, it's the function. And I think that's what our businesses really want to see. That's what I want to see as well, because clarity and precision ultimately are what we need at the end of the day.
Answered like a true politician. Well done.
Once in a while.
Very eloquent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam, for those. I'm going to throw it open now. I think we have a mic, so if you don't mind putting your hand up and just saying briefly where you're from. And asking a question. And it would be great to have questions rather than long statements at this moment in
That's
time.
my job.
Yes.
Steve Daly, BCMS. The title on the slide behind you is Your Insider Guide to Leaving the EU. I understand that senior civil servants now are believing we may not, or at least the possibility of not leaving is becoming stronger by the day. What's your views on that?
Now, this goes back to my checkers, chess, and Monopoly question. I think if I expressed views on that, I'd be doing a disservice to our businesses because they have to plan on the basis of something. And I try to avoid speculation and either magnifying or commenting too much on some of that speculation because ultimately it doesn't help businesses with the outcome, right? If that were to happen, it's the status quo for a lot of businesses and they can trade on the back of that. If it doesn't happen, which is, I think, still the most likely outcome, then they need to prepare for the change that lies ahead of them. So again, I'll go back to my practical answers question. We hear about different speculation literally every day, Steve, literally all the time. And sometimes it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other within the space of 24 hours. And I think if we put businesses on that roller coaster ride, then their desire to recruit, invest, look at new export markets or anything else decreases even further. So I'm just hoping to give them a bit of stability, quite honestly.
Next question. Other questions? Yes, lady here.
The firms that you say are prepared.
Here's a microphone for you, even though you have quite a good voice.
Yeah.
I'm an insurance consultant. Financial services aren't really considered in the same way that other services have been considered. You mentioned that a third of the businesses are preparing. Many insurance companies have prepared plans,
Yep.
but without knowing the detail, how do we know that those plans will actually be accepted? We're setting up insurance hubs in European countries. Unless they're subsidiaries, they might not work.
Yeah.
We have spent thousands and millions of pounds on this, and even if it doesn't go ahead, which is my personal hope, we have spent so much money that we could have invested and improved.
Yeah. A lot of businesses say to us that they have the sort of contingency spending that they're doing on a regrets basis and the contingency spending they're doing on a no regrets basis. And I think for a lot of businesses, particularly in the services sector, it's still on the regrets side because they don't know whether actually it will be successful or not, whether they'll be able to carry out those plans or not. So I completely agree with you. I don't think a third of businesses are prepared. I think a third of businesses are taking steps. They are preparing. They are active. They are doing something. Not all of that will land, but then, for those of us who are in the world of business, everything doesn't land anyway. You build some plans from time to time, and when it comes to execution, they don't always work. So we're all taking calculated risks, and I'm sure everyone's audit and risk committees are very, very heavily auditing and looking at what it is that we're doing in that space. Insurance is a particularly difficult one, right? A lot of you probably think you have to repaper absolutely every cross-border contract you've ever entered into in life in the universe. That's sort of copper bottoming the situation to make sure that the worst doesn't happen and that things are left without legal force. And that's completely understandable, but as you say, very expensive. My hope would have been that we would have gotten clarity in a deal much sooner so that more businesses wouldn't have had to push the button on some of those steps. The process has taken a long time. And if we'd had a line of sight that gave us a deal sooner and then a longer transition into whatever the new arrangements would be, it would have been easier for a lot of firms. It's not the way it's panned out, however.
Yes, and you're right that lots of firms are plowing millions into contingency plans that ultimately will be non-value added, and of course line the pockets of law firms and big four accounting firms and others. Not that they're not lovely
A lot of
people.
consultants are having a very good time.
Absolutely, but you know, it is. You have to question: is that really a value-adding spend in the long term, or is that another less productive short-term investment burden that the 1/3 that are preparing have to make? Okay, next question. Yes, here.
The microphone is on its long journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Professor Kanis Raja from the Centre for Executive and Professional Development, London. I have two little questions linked together. The first part is, you represent businesses, 75,000 you say, and you have a certain view. So my question is, are there another 75,000 businesses from which the Brexiteers are taking their feedback from, because they give a completely different view, that we are completely prepared, they're very bullish, and we are going to conquer the world. So that's one. And linked to that...
That's not a little question.
And linked to that, I bought into that dream and decided that I'll go abroad and take services to the Far East, because they say that's where the markets are. They are producing babies like there's no tomorrow. And the four biggest, fastest growing economies outside India and China, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. Leaving Thailand aside, I've been to the other three and a number of times. But I don't see the evidence of the British doing anything of any consequence down there. And I compare this with the Germans, who are within Brexit, within the EU, and we are leaving the EU, and they are supporting their overseas missions with their departments of trade and so on, whereas our DTI is actually having a token presence there, and if not, the Foreign Office is cutting back on expenditure. And if you then look at the other scenario of the Japanese, a country we'd like to emulate, they are doing exactly what the Germans are doing. And they're taking the longer-term view. And I can see they're going to be successful. So how do I explain this?
Those are your two questions.
Those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
You said, Constance, that there are two small questions. They're two very large questions indeed. The first question about, where different sides in the debate take their inspiration from. A lot of people on both extremes of the debate have decided to make the facts fit their story rather than the story fit the facts. And I would say literally it's on both sides. We had warnings of instant economic collapse in the aftermath of the referendum if it went in one direction, and in the other direction they said we don't need any arrangement at all with the world's biggest trading bloc because we'll be absolutely fine, right? You can always find, in the world of business representation, you can always find a business or a group of businesses from whom you can take anecdotes that lead you to believe that your story is the one true version of life in the universe, right? I try to present it quite differently, which is that business is not monolithic. It is messy. Business people have different views, both on Brexit and what kind of economic course the UK should take thereafter. They were not unified during the referendum, and they won't be unified after. I can identify the segmentation and the trends, which businesses thought one way and which businesses thought the other, but it's not for me to take a value judgment on that. It's for me to actually explain those differences, but also to try to find the signal in the noise. And the signal in the noise for me is they need clarity and precision and practical answers about what their trading conditions are, whether they were Brexiteers or Remainers, so they can get on. Your second point is a hugely, hugely important one for me, because I've spent a few years of my life now working on building up our network of British Chambers of Commerce in countries around the world. We have a UK network, but we also have a growing network of international affiliates around the world. And one of the things that is interesting for us is precisely the scenario that you paint, where you go to some of these countries and some of these markets where you're enthusiastically received and people say to you, we have some amazing British firms here, but there's so few of them. Where are the rest of them? Why aren't you here? We want to do more business with you. We think you're honest. We think you're trustworthy. We think you deliver to time. We think you abide by contracts. You have a great legal system. You have great minds. You have great expertise. Why aren't you here? So we're trying to do our bit as a very small, not-for-dividend private sector organization expanding around the world. And if I think, I've got British chambers in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Malaysia. They're small organizations, but they're trying to do their best. Where the Germans and other countries have been successful over time has been that literally since the end of the Second World War, they have put in place a strategy on training people and a strategy on how they do exports. And they've left them alone ever since. They have not changed them. Consistency is what allows a lot of countries to do well. This country is the most maddeningly inconsistent in terms of the way it funds and promotes different policies. In terms of trade promotion, I have worked with people who said, I'm trying to deliver trade promotion for the UK government. They give me a 6-month contract, but I don't get the terms of the contract until 5 months in, then they extend it for 5 months, then they change the metrics. That's the kind of thing that we are dealing with in a lot of respects here. So is it wrong that the Department for International Trade is having to cut, on the basis of the 2015 spending review, how much it spends in overseas posts around the world? Yes. If trade is the answer to the UK's future success, we need to be boosting our resources on trade, but we need to be consistent in how we apply them as well. And that is where successive UK governments of all political colours have really got it wrong. It's the same as our education system. It's the constant, endless initiative-itis, recreating things every few months. Businesses feel, I think, that they start to engage with a policy after a year. They feel comfortable with it after 10, and they hear about it in a year. They start to engage with it after 5 years, and they feel comfortable with it after 10 years, right? We do things on maybe a 5-6 month basis, not a 1, 5, 10 year basis, is what we need to be doing. So I completely agree with you. We can do more. I'm optimistic about what we can do to get more British companies out there. I want to work, for example, with the High Commissioners of various Commonwealth countries to get more UK companies excited about going into Commonwealth markets. I also want to work with ambassadors from European countries about not just continuity, but growing our trade with the European Union. Because European trade is still going to be hugely important to the UK after we leave the EU, even if the terms of that trade change. So what I'm trying to say to businesses is there's no better trade or worse trade, it's trade. Where do you have competitive advantage? Where do you have the product or service that really is going to beat the competition, and where are you going to make the deals? So that's what we're trying to do, but we're only part of the answer, I think.
So the other thing, just to build on this point that Adam's made and the question you've asked, so CMI has led with DIT, just to give DIT a little bit of a break on this, a mission of the chartered professional bodies. So, chartered professional bodies, and I'm not just talking about CMI, I'm talking about all chartered professional bodies, are a British USP. And I say that as an American and as a Brit. The Americans don't have them, right? The Americans don't have them, the Australians don't have them, the Germans sure as heck don't have them. And they are absolutely very strongly admired in the Commonwealth countries. The Royal Charter holds sway. And so what we believe is that in the post-Brexit world, it's absolutely appropriate to be pushing those chartered bodies. And DIT agrees with us. And we did a mission to Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. It's the first of its kind in modern times. Maybe they did them back in 1100, when we were, or 1600, when we were sailing the seas and had the Great British Empire, but not since. They were incredibly well received for all the chartered bodies. It was CMI, it was ICAW, it was IET, it was RICS. And DIT did a great job working with the British Chamber of Commerce, working with the British Council, and we are repeating that mission to China and Hong Kong in April. So I do think that they're starting to get it, and I completely agree with Adam that pushing Britishness, they love British standards in these countries. 8 out of the top 10 standards are British. British chartered professional qualifications are unique. And so pushing those in the wake of Brexit and combining that with getting British companies to export are two of the biggest things we can do. And I know that DIT has been repurposed, and they're now judged on the value of the deals they conclude, not the number of conversations they initiate, which is like completely not outcome focused. It's the value of the deal. So I think there's a little bit of watch this space, and I'm hopeful that we will get more consistency. But by the way, renaming and splitting up and rehousing all the departments was like a bit of an own goal in that regard, right? So that's just building on your question. It was a great question. Other ones, the gentleman there, 2 rows back from, there you go.
Keith Lester from Ecologia Environmental. I wonder if you have any comments about the downside risk looking forward of dealing with the European Union. Following on from the last question, the growth is going to come in the Far East and in probably Africa in a few years' time as populations increase. And the downside risk, I think, with unemployment in parts of Europe is quite serious.
Yeah, look, we are treated to a politicized version of the economic facts sometimes, but as you say, you know, the economists that we all trust say that the growth is going to come from emerging economies around the world, as you say, in the Far East and elsewhere. For businesses, if they are selling strongly into a market, they'll obviously be looking at some of those risks. And I think the one thing that differentiates our businesses from the way we think about this through the policy and political lens is one is thinking about the success of their P&L, and the other is thinking about the macroeconomic success of a country. And I suppose in positions like ours, and we're sort of split between the two, we want to help individual businesses with their P&L, but we also want to see that macro picture be successful as well. So that's why I don't see any trouble with saying that, you know, trying to grow and support and sustain trade with Europe in future is an untrammeled good. But it's not trade with Europe to the exclusion of trade with anywhere else. It's Europe and, not or, I suppose. When I look at chamber membership, of those who are exporters, who are a very significant proportion, very few are exporters to the European Union only. And I can only surmise that that is on the basis of the fact that their product or service is extremely good and that they're competitive in other markets around the world as well. So if we focus on having the best products and services, the best business environment here in the UK, and really strong trade promotion, it almost doesn't matter what the ultimate split of our exports is. It's that the quantum will have grown around the world, and I think that's what we're trying to argue. So Europe is still going to be a good market, but yes, as you say, there are demographic changes going on, there are purchasing power changes going on, there are geopolitical dynamics that are going on even at the moment in terms of you know, global trade and tariffs and various other things that will make those market dynamics more unstable and more difficult for a lot of businesses. But we try to say, you know, you've got a lot of markets, are you competitive in them, and why not go for it?
Patrick.
Thank you. Just to take the discussion in a slightly different direction, I think if you sit on an audit and risk committee, you're looking at the connected and associated risk at the moment of not just Brexit, but also a Labour government from a business point of view. And as an American friend of mine said yesterday, either way you're screwed. For a business, there's actually as many significant risks associated with, from a business point of view, in terms of what will actually happen, how can you plan for those things, as there are with Brexit, if you combine the two together, because there's a possibility, obviously the risk of a change of government is relatively high. So actually just to think about Brexit on its own is probably, although that's chilling and difficult, is probably just naive. You need to think about those two things together. I wonder what your views on that were.
Yeah, I will sanitize the question into audit and risk committee speak, if I may, which is the risk of change in the external political environment. Is that a fair way to put it? You know, on a 5x5 matrix at the moment, I would say that it's, you know, in the 20s and rising, and red. How would I put it? Very red, indeed. How would I put this? Businesses are concerned about what would be an unprecedented overreach, I think, into corporate governance, which is British corporate governance being admired around the world as the gold standard in a lot of respects. I think they're worried about the consequences of forced redistribution of company ownership, I think they're worried about being forced to have a one-size-fits-all approach to how they compose their boards based on characteristics rather than skills. And I think all those concerns are valid. But Anne and I were talking about this previously. If she can bring something from the pre-conversation in, then so can I. Business also hasn't covered itself in glory. We don't have the right to sit here and bleat about what may be done to us if we are also not acknowledging and reacting to the fact that the world is not in a good place, and actually that our reputation as business people is often not in a good place with the public. So we have responsibility too. We have responsibility to demonstrate engagement and ownership not in the sense of shares, ownership in the sense of real involvement and belonging in a business at every level. We have the responsibility, I think, also on ownership in the other sense, to expand how we get employee participation in our businesses. Now, I know that a lot of our biggest businesses all have employee share schemes. That's good. We should expand that. And decision-making forums that engage and involve employees, and working groups that engage and involve employees, that's good too. But we don't talk about it enough, and we don't democratize it enough. We could probably do better at that. But what is scary is the notion that a political party of any color would say to you tomorrow, actually, we're going to take 10% of your share capital, put it not even in the hands of the employees themselves, but in the hands of ill-defined committees that will then pump out dividends to people. That would be a really dangerous precedent. And I think if you're in a boardroom in Tokyo, if you're in a boardroom in Toronto, if you're in a boardroom in New York, and you're thinking about your investments in the UK at the moment, that would give you pause.
It was exactly that point from a US investor.
Yeah. Well, but the basic principle points of employee ownership, we know that works. It drives engagement. I used to work for Procter & Gamble. Guess who owns the majority of P&G shares?
Employees.
The employees, right? So the principles are not evil.
It's how you get there.
But the forced execution, so my way or the highway, is wrong, right? That's why I think, that's why I completely agree with you, and I think we do need to get to a more responsible capitalism. And then the other thing that, of course, will deal with a lot of these skills issues, we talked about, for example, the Apprenticeship Levy, and it'd be interesting to get your views on this, is the gender pay gap. Yeah. So that discussion, we know that increasing women's participation in the workforce, it's another 150 billion quid. Oops, another 5% of GDP. So isn't that another policy driver that is within the gift of business to accelerate? What do you think about that? I'm sorry, I know that was my question, but I thought I'd ask it.
No, and it's a really good question, because I said earlier that we need to be actually actively exploiting all of the talent we have in this country. We need to be going back and saying, hang on, where are we not getting the most out of people as businesses that also allows them to lead successful and fulfilled working lives? And, I see this myself at the school gates every morning, the parents with anywhere more than 2 children where one parent has given up work because actually the cost base just doesn't make any sense anymore. It doesn't make sense to keep working. People stop, then they try to restart. They restart at a lower base than their skills would suggest, and they never recover. And you get that productivity gap that we're talking about. We all know what the problem is. And I think about things like childcare and elder care a lot. It may sound strange coming from a business representative, but I spend a lot of time, having been through the experience recently with myself and with a young daughter in childcare, thinking about, in primary school now, thinking about what happens from the end of parental leave to when kids go to school, and then the wraparound care that you have available afterwards. You've got a patchwork of different initiatives out there. Why don't you give parents an annual account? Let them use it on whatever provision they need in order to get the arrangements they need to go back to work. Why don't you have employers actually, and this is an area where there is some agreement between us and the party of opposition at the moment. Why shouldn't employers offer jobs as flexible unless there is a compelling reason why they cannot be flexible? I'm running a small, £5 million business with 30 employees. We advertise every single one of our jobs as flexible. We can do that because, we are small. We're at the leading edge of some of this stuff. We see it. We need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I've just hired into the number 2 role in my organization a very successful existing job share pair who have 5 kids between them, but who decided that they were going to go and look for the working model that allowed them to continue their progression into senior management and growth. I have another returner who came back after the birth of her daughter, who literally wanted to work out an arrangement. She was a senior marketer in the city. She now does 2.5 days a week with us, and we have access to a skill set that we never imagined we would have in our business. I think we have a responsibility, those of us in business who've been fortunate enough to go down that road, to talk to others about the lived experience of it, not the abstract stuff.
Yep.
About statistics and participation, but the real world. How do you do it, and how did you make it work for you, and how did you overcome the doubt barrier? Because we can change some of the participation issues that we have in our workforce at the moment. It takes a little bit of a mixture of a change in policy and a change in business attitudes, but if we focus on it, we can actually get there.
Yes, and I completely agree with your flexible working point. Over 70% of employees, men and women of all ages, want to work flexibly. Only 9% of jobs are advertised as flexible. And like Adam, we have flexible working at CMI, and we get amazing talent. And so, you know, that's actually something that's within the gift of every manager in this room, you know, is tapping into that talent and tapping into and improving your own management and leadership skills. And those two things alone, not that you can add them up like this, are worth $300 billion. Not that you can add them up like this, but so they're huge productivity drivers. Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and the hands are coming thick and fast. Maria.
Always start slow and then build to a close.
Thank you. I'm Maria Luzzo, and I work for a manufacturing services company.
Yeah.
American, by the way. I would like to go back to your list, to your checklist,
yes.
and a couple of points that you raised about planning and project planning. So 19 of these points are actually in red. 6 months to Brexit.
Fire the project manager, right?
Exactly. Well, but even common sense. If 19 of these critical points are still in red, how is your interaction with government, and what kind of, let's say, highlights you can share with us from conversation with them? Because if it was HS2 or the Olympics, it would have been a disaster, 6 months to the Olympics. Yeah. And another point to add to that is the RIS-MOG projection that it would take another 50 years. It would take 50 years to recover from the going down the cliff. So what is your views, and how you approach government personnel with these 19 points that are unanswered? Thank you.
When we speak to them at every level, I would say that interaction at the 30,000-foot level is excellent, but that there are often simply not the resources at the middle level in order to interact on some of those helicopter level issues that most affect businesses. Excuse me. Nor are there necessarily the structures in place in order to address those issues. Countries that have been really successful at dealing with change in trade have got this incredibly strong participatory model with business and society in the next, civil society organizations in the next room, you know, a business at the end of a phone call to test propositions and things like that. We are having to build that from a standing start, and I think that's proving very, very difficult here in the UK. So we've got a capacity crunch with a clock that is ticking, exactly as you say. Now, we're working to try to resolve some of those issues, as many as we can. I can't say to you with confidence that all 19 of those are going to go from red to amber to green over the next few months. But we think that if government actually can do more of what some departments are doing, like I think HM Revenue and Customs are actually doing a good job in this respect. They're working in great detail with a number of businesses about what needs to change under a range of scenarios. That's very good. Not every department is doing that, and I think actually that needs to be mainstream. The problem is there's just not a lot of time.
Right. So, okay, so HMRC is the best practice, and is that the one green thing?
No, they are. Well, the VAT is the one green thing, but HMRC are making a very, very significant effort, and I think that's to be commended, because they're one of the front ends of change.
And which department needs to pull their socks up the most? Which one has the most?
I don't
red?
have time to make that long list. Obviously, you know, with amongst friends, not for social media, you know, businesses have a particular love love-hate relationship with the Home Office, and I'm sure many of you have had interaction with them in the past over immigration applications, for example. Clarity on immigration policy would be one of the asks,
Right.
obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Okay, the gentleman there, and then the person in the back.
Yes, good evening. My name is Chris Kent, and we're starting a new business which is about marketing. So I was quite encouraged what you said about the respect for the charter status being a chartered marketer as well as a chartered manager. So that's always good to hear. And I do see that reflected in the conversations that I'm having with businesses, the kind of respect for the charter status. I just wanted to pick up on that point. We're actually based in the Isle of Man, which is quite good at kind of reinventing itself. So we didn't actually get a chance to cast our vote because it wasn't allowed, but there you go. But my particular point I wanted to address with you, Adam, is the skills gap. My particular area of interest and the area of my study and research, etc., is around the digital marketing skills gap and its impact on particularly micro businesses. Because we're talking about skills and upskilling, and the UK is one of the leading countries in the digital marketing sphere. So if, first of all, we don't have access to skills coming in to train them, and we don't have access to export our skills, I'm actually wondering whether in some strange way that might be a good thing, because a lot of the digital talent will remain local, which means then we can go and expand more globally. And our particular area of interest is maybe, one particular area of interest is in upskilling micro business owners so they do have the marketing skills they need to successfully market their business. And then once they understand the marketing process, and we've got a greater level of awareness and understanding, they can then go and fly and export and do everything else that they need to do. So really, it's not just a case of the skills gap that you mentioned, but there's a whole range of skills gap and the impact of the skills gap globally. Because there is a global digital marketing skills gap.
Sure. No, and I completely agree with you. It's interesting you talk about the Isle of Man. I saw the Chief Minister literally the other day in Liverpool.
He was at the conference, wasn't he?
Yes, I tried to see the Crown Dependencies Chief Ministers, and one of the questions I asked them is, you're not part of the EU, how do you manage things? Because actually there are lessons from the Crown Dependencies in a lot of cases for the UK as we try to navigate Brexit. On digital marketing skills gap, I've got a really trite answer that's not going to satisfy you, but actually I think has some truth to it, okay? Take any 14 or 15-year-old in this country, and they're amazingly inspired in terms of the digital skills that they have, and particularly in comparison with a lot of our business owners. The thing that we see at a local level regularly is how hard it is to get businesses and schools together so that you can inspire some of those 14, 15, 16-year-olds to then go on to work with some of those companies. Sometimes it's as simple as a work placement, sometimes it's into an apprenticeship or anything else. And there is, I think there is a grow your own principle that we need to be working on here. And in this particular area, when you do have young people who are born as digital natives, we have the raw talent, but we haven't got the process and the pipeline that we need in order to get them into some of those firms. So one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is talking about businesses and schools. A lot of our chambers around the country are hugely active in getting their local members. Some of them are micro businesses in this space, some of them are larger, literally into schools and engaging with young people on a regular basis in the schools. What they report back to us is that schools are so pressed on their official requirements and testing and various other things that they sometimes have a hard time engaging. And it's not for lack of desire, but it's for lack of flexibility and ownership to be able to say, I know this is practical and applicable to my students and I really want to do it. So I think giving schools the flexibility to have more applied learning and to be able to engage in that respect would be quite helpful. I think the other thing that would be quite helpful, and again, this sounds a bit trite, and the teaching unions always give me trouble for saying it, is I think every teacher in schools, primary and secondary around the UK, should spend a certain number of days every year in a local business, be that a micro business or a larger firm, just to understand in their own shoes what they are preparing some of their students to go into. I know how overburdened teachers are, and I know how difficult their lives are already with the immense asks that are being made of them. But I think it would be absolutely transformational, because what we see at the moment when school kids go out to visit firms very often is a teacher saying, see, unless you go on to sixth form and then on to university, you're going to end up working here. And I swear to you, this is not an apocryphal story. We hear it on a regular basis that it is still happening on the ground in the real world. Never mind usually that the firm that they're visiting, the average person working there makes double the average wage for the area, sometimes more than that. So
And a lot more than the teacher.
yeah, so this is a place where people are successful. You know, it's not teachers' fault, but because teaching is a graduate profession, there is a natural bias towards pushing young people towards A-levels and university in the teaching profession. And I think having that experience of more work with business would help that. It's part of the answer to the digital skills gap, because then actually you could get them into some of the businesses who have the needs and actually link the two sides up. So it's not the full answer, but it's certainly part of it.
So to build on that, we completely agree with you. We would like to see schools measured on the number of apprenticeships they create, not just university placements, and on giving every single student employability skills before they graduate. And that's easier to do. My daughter used to go to a private British girls' school. We transferred her age 15 to the largest state high school in North Carolina with 3,000 students, many of whom were on free school lunches, i.e. socioeconomically disadvantaged. No one in that 3,000 large state high school could graduate unless they did their senior year a project with a local business person as a mentor, developing a new product or service, writing it up and presenting it to a board of local business people. It was just part of their graduation requirement. And that's the kind of thing that I think would make a big difference here, because I completely agree with you. It's totally under leveraged. So again, great question. Now there was one more in the back, and then I think we're probably going to wrap it up and have some time for networking.
My name is Dominic Sutton. I run data analytics for a US multinational. I'm going to leave because we're running out of time, I'm going to leave out the data transfer question, which is an enormous question.
Absolutely right.
And extremely worrying for those of us who work in the field. And I'm going to go to pick up something that came up in your QA, which was about the very late date of EU citizens being given some form of assurance. And as one of those EU citizens, we look at the way Windrush British citizens have been treated. We look at the hostile environment. We look at the begrudged promises, and we have no faith in them.
Yeah.
Why should we stay?
Well, I am not a politician, so I can only answer the question from the perspective of our businesses. If you feel valued in your local community and in the business that you are working in, then rest assured that in those businesses we will fight for you, and we will try to do what is right for you. The number of businesses that I talk to who are doing absolutely everything that they can for their European employees, nothing is too good to save the people you have in your business already, rather than have to start again. And I hope that that approach then spills over to an easy political process. Judging by your accent, you're from the one EU country that actually won't have any problems after Brexit, because, of course, you know, Irish nationals aren't foreigners in British law, and British nationals aren't foreigners in Irish law. Yes, but there are other things. Yes, yes, there are other things. Yes, and actually, I'm in Dublin on the 5th with my counterpart from Chambers Ireland, and we are working on some of those practical issues which face particularly east-west trade across the Irish Sea. Very big issue. Look, we have denounced the fact that it's taken this long to give some sort of clarity and certainty to European citizens in the UK. And the only message that I can give from our business communities is that, you know, these are valued individuals that we care about a great deal and that we want to keep in our businesses for many years to come.
Yes, and on that note, a huge thank you to Adam for answering all these questions.
Thank you.
With a great deal of energy, eloquence, and practicing what you're preaching, which is that practical, let's get it done, be outcome focused, and you know, take back control in a way as businesses of our own fate.
Can I ask you one question, Anne, before we finish up?
Of course you can.
When is she going to get her own talk show, ladies and gentlemen? Because I think it should be absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. I don't know. maybe
Potential agent in the audience.
Yeah,
this evening.
after
Yes.
perhaps when in 6 months from now, you never know, on a fatal day, once we leave Brexit behind and move on to other things.
Very good.
But no, thank you so much, Adam. It's been a huge pleasure as ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Please stay, everybody. Have a drink and some food, please.